Elaine. Sorry we're a little late getting on here. We're talking through some of the questions. I hope everybody's having a good night tonight. And I'm here with my dad.
Hi.
Who also happens to be a retired allergy and asthma doctor and a retired pediatrician. So it's a pretty great thing for me to have. And he just happens to be in town right whenever somebody asks about some of these questions about breathing and lungs and what we can do about them. So I'm just going to ask him a couple questions. And if you're catching on here live, I'd love to know that you're here. Tanya, how's it going? Christy, I see you're on here. And so, Dad,
Okay.
what are some reasons why people get out of breath when they're riding or climbing their mountain bike, whenever they may get out of breath sometimes and may not get out of breath other times?
Well, I guess you'd start out with thinking that they just may not be in very good condition. And, but that would mean not exactly, you wouldn't be able to do it last week and then able to do it maybe shortly before that. But
Yep.
it would be kind of, you gradually would build up and get better and better. But that's one of the things, as you get older, like over 60 or so, you find that you lose your conditioning pretty quick. And if you were able to do it a month ago and then you went out to do it today, it'd be harder, it'd be a lot harder.
Definitely. Lacking conditioning is something. And you and I, or us, we're going to go over that of some different exercises that you can do specifically for conditioning next week. So we're going to focus a little bit more on what Dad's going to say next.
Okay, there's other things too. There's medical problems that you might notice. Probably the most common thing would be exercise-induced bronchospasm or exercise-induced asthma. You could also have cardiac arrhythmias. You could also have something that's a little bit less common, but spasm in your vocal cords can do this. Which
I had no idea about before our conversation before this. I did not know that your vocal cords could spasm.
It's probably about a 1% kind of thing, and the exercise-induced asthma for an active person who doesn't have a history of heart disease is probably the most common thing.
Which I do. I have exercise-induced asthma. I've had it since I was a kid, which was
probably inherited it some from our gene pool. My brother Bob had a terrible time passing his physical fitness tests in the Army, and once we gave him an inhaler to use, he passed it just fine. In fact, he passed it just fine enough that he helped somebody that fell and twisted their ankle, and he still passed it.
That's good.
So it makes a big difference sometimes. I have some trouble with bronchospasm and wheezing when I have a chest cold or a bronchitis or with allergies and asthma. Allergies act up can make asthma much worse. And so probably Liz inherited this from my side of the family.
And so if you have breathing issues where you think it's any of those above, either cardiac issues, or if you have exercise-induced asthma as a potential, or if you think you even might have the vocal cord spasm, I want to know. So if you just type it in, comment down below, and just to help share it with some people, because some people think that this can be a pretty big fault of theirs, that their body's not doing what they need it to do, and they get a little bit self-conscious of it. I know that I do sometimes on the trail, or whenever I played soccer. Michelle asked, difference in exercise-induced asthma and being out of breath. We'll go over that in just a little bit. We'll talk a little bit more about it, and you'll kind of see some differentiations as we go. Okay, Michelle, great question though.
Okay.
So going into more of the vocal spasm, just in case anybody has a question on that, what's some way that you can tell whether it is that?
If it's vocal cord spasm, it doesn't respond much to an inhaler. That would be one of the ways that people usually notice it, because they usually go to the doctor and they usually say, well, I get short of breath with exercise. And one of the first things your usual practitioner, whether it's a general practice doctor or a nurse practitioner or whoever, will do is give you an albuterol or a bronchospasm relief bronchodilator, a quick acting one. And if this doesn't make any difference, then it's probably not asthma if it doesn't respond to the asthma treatment. And it can be vocal cord spasm. One of the other ways that is mentioned at least in some of the things you read, is that if you have something you like to sing and you try to sing it when your vocal cord spasm's going on, you can't do it. You can't hit your notes. You can't make it sound right.
Cool, perfect. So that's a good way people can see out on the trail.
But there's other things too you get short of breath with.
Yep.
And
We're not covering all of them. We're just kind of covering a brief overview of some of the more common ones. How about for cardiac conditions and that's making you out of breath? What's some easy ways to check out on the trail?
Okay, easy thing. Well, when you got cardiac problems that's making you feel out of breath, you usually, not always, but you usually feel things a little bumpy inside. And even if you don't, which if you can usually find your pulse and you can usually stop and feel it, and it'll be either not going regular, or it'll be slower than it should be, or it'll be just kind of all over the place, or maybe just real fast. And if that seems to be the case, then you need to get that checked out.
Perfect. So definitely checking your pulse. If you go to your thumb side, you see a couple tendons down through here. Just put 2 fingers very lightly next to that, and you should feel a pulse there. That's your radial artery, and it's a good way for you to check your pulse when you're out on the trail. Just as a nice simple check. Are things functioning as they should? Is it fast enough as it should be? Is it feeling jumpy or bumpy, just as Dad said, for that?
Or you can look at your Fitbit if you're wearing one, or your Apple Watch,
your different heart rate monitor. Perfect.
And it does help to tell that too.
Now, exercise-induced asthma. What makes you know that it's exercise-induced asthma versus just being out of breath within that?
Usually with exercise-induced asthma or exercise-induced bronchospasm, which I guess is probably the better term.
Technically what it's supposed to be called now.
You're kind of short of breath feeling, and you're trying to get air in, except if you look at your chest, it's really not little, like you can't get the air in. It's too much air in there, you can't get the old air out to get the new air in. And you probably will hear some wheezy, squeaky noises, and you have a tight feeling like maybe you're wearing your wetsuit too tight or something, and sometimes gives you an upset stomach too, and you almost always cough. But those are the kind of things that mostly you notice. Other people may notice it too. They may say, "Dang, you're wheezing."
Yeah, that's true. Ask people around you if they hear you breathing. One of the things that he's talking about is that your chest is so big. It's called air trapping, and it's so that air keeps getting in, but you can't actually breathe it out. And that's where it becomes a bigger issue, is that if you can't get new air in, then you're not getting new oxygen in there. And so that's where it becomes more of the bigger issue within it. And so you're trapping that air inside your lungs, which if you have a balloon and you try to fill it up, there's only so much that it can expand. Yeah. And so you just can't get any more in.
Yeah, exactly. Okay.
So now that we know a little bit more about exercise-induced bronchospasm or exercise-induced asthma, we know a little bit about some other causes within that. What are some things, since we are getting ready to go into allergy season, what are some big things that people maybe could do or they need to watch out for, or that they can help within that they can do now?
Okay. Well, one of the first things, if you really have a little problem with asthma at other times, you probably will notice that, at least in most younger people anyway, that when the allergy season is kicking up, you're worse. You also probably will notice that when leaf falling season, because a lot of people burn leaves, that the smoke that's in the air will make you worse. You'll also a lot of times notice that when the wind blows and there's a lot of dead leaves and stuff that the mold is working on to decompose, it makes you worse. So at least 90% or maybe more of people who have asthma symptoms for these other things will have exercise-induced bronchospasm. Now, it's surely not the case that everybody that has exercise-induced asthma has regular asthma too, or exercise-induced bronchospasm more properly. And there are several tests that can be done to kind of get a better idea of this. And probably These are mostly done at an allergist's office or at a pulmonologist's office. And of course, as being an allergist for 27 years plus, I would probably think that the allergists do a better job. Part of this is because the pulmonologists are so busy, and there is an unbelievable lot of people that they take care of with COPD and mostly related to smoking and other problems, lung cancer and pulmonary fibrosis. I mean, they're busy guys or ladies.
And also, from my understanding, is that exercise-induced asthma has a huge component when it comes to actual allergies. And so seeing somebody that is a little bit even more so allergy focused and knows how to treat it a little bit better, then they can sometimes get down to a little bit more of some of the external factors that can play a role into your exercise-induced asthma and help it not be quite as a factor.
Yeah, I'd say that's true. And you do a very, I guess allergy doctors have the reputation for about the best history takers. And I guess it's because when you're looking for problems that people are allergic to, sometimes it's a little bit like playing Sherlock Holmes. And it just really is that way.
You gotta listen a little bit more.
Yeah.
Perfect.
Yeah.
So since we are going into allergy season within that, what are some things that they could do to help with their exercise-induced asthma, or if they know they have some breathing issues that pop up more so from August, September, and through into the winter?
Mm-hmm. Sometimes taking something to help with the allergy symptoms, even an antihistamine, like one of the non-sedating antihistamines, like Allegra or something, Claritin, Zyrtec, is a big help. Sometimes using one of the nasal sprays that have a little tiny dose of a steroid, like the generic Flonase or something like that, makes a big difference. When it's a windy day and there's a high pollen count, you're probably going to have a much bigger exposure than if it's not a windy day. So keep that in mind. And there's other things when there's a lot of smoke in the air, say if there's a forest fire or something around, or people are burning leaves like crazy around where you're going to be riding, that's probably going to bother you some. And it's like we were in Alaska this summer and we saw a lot of people that were biking Alaska, which seems like kind of a really hard thing for me to think about doing. But they were really having a hard time when Alaska started burning, more or less. There were over 100 fires in Alaska when we left.
So
it was in July.
So is wearing a mask a potential option to help with some of it?
It is not for smoke so much, but if there's cold air, that's another thing that causes trouble. Cold, dry air particularly, and that irritates the lining of your airway. Drinking plenty of liquids, mostly water, helps with that.
Staying hydrated.
Staying hydrated, and wearing a scarf or a mask around your nose and mouth will help you to warm things up a little bit.
For the cold, dry air.
Just making a conscious effort to try to breathe through your nose instead of through your mouth makes a big difference too.
So, but nothing that would technically help for some of the smoke or some of the other allergies besides potentially taking something. What about doing some of the nasal rinses?
The nasal rinse sometimes is a big help.
So that can kind of clear things out and help you breathe a little bit better through your nose.
But you're not likely to want to do that on a trail or something. Right?
No, but before it. Don't you guys bring your nasal rinses on the trail with you?
Well, probably not. Some people, it seems like making sure that they take some vitamin C and maybe a 500 to 1,000 milligram or something like that before you go makes a difference. There are several medicines that a physician or a nurse practitioner or somebody could prescribe for you that do seem to help. And generally what they would start with on something like that would be a short-acting bronchodilator or a quick relief.
That'll be the role,
what we would always call it. And that would be like albuterol. And that's absolutely the most common one.
Perfect. And then Oh shoot, what I was just gonna say.
I don't know, but there are some long-acting
Oh,
bronchodilators,
that's right.
and salmeterol is one of them, or salbutamol, and I think I pronounced that wrong. But anyway, a combo drug that has a little bit of corticosteroid to it, like Advair or something like Symbicort, would also be helpful if you have been tested a little bit and found out that you might really have asthma.
Some other
Now, the
things
testing
within
that mostly an allergist would do after the history would be a spirometry, and this is more or less a gauge that's, or a sensor that's hooked up to a computer, and you take a big breath in and you blow hard until you've emptied your lungs, essentially, and it measures how fast you're able to blow out and what your total volume is going to be. And you do that if you just have exercise-induced problems, don't have much trouble any other time, then they a lot of times will do a baseline when you're not having any trouble, and then they will have you to ride an exercise bike or run on a treadmill, and then do it again. Now sometimes, and what we used to do at my office sometimes, particularly if people were having trouble outdoors in the fall, I'd have them run around the building a few times, and I would run around the building with them sometimes to make sure that everybody was okay. But most of the time, one of us would stand at one side of the building and one of us would stand at the other side, and we would cheer them on to run hard, and then we would come in and do a repeat spirometry.
Now,
and then we would be able to tell.
And
if we did notice that had made some difference, then we a lot of times would give them a dose of the bronchospasm relieving inhaler like albuterol, and or albuterol and ipratropium together sometimes, and we would see how much improvement we got. And most of the time it'll come back up to at least 90-95% of what it was at their baseline.
Perfect. So that gives you a little bit of idea of what they would do actually at the allergist if you were getting your lungs tested, for finding out a little bit more information and seeing it. Because if you do have a serious issue within this, then it is good to bring on a doctor and have them in your side and your corner for your care. Now, there's a couple other things that I know we talked about before this that I want to make sure we covered. And one was warming up.
Yeah. A lot of times when people have exercise-induced bronchospasm, they can warm up first and maybe bring on a little bit of a bronchospastic deal. And you know, if you warm up, not charge up the highest hill you got there to warm up, but just ride around in the parking lot and the lower levels a little bit for 10-15 minutes, and you may notice a little tightness in the chest, and you kind of breathe through that, or maybe ride your bike gently through that. Then that calms down, and then you've got what they call a latent period, or a period where you won't have much spasm, because I guess you've used up most of your mediators that cause that, and you'll have 2 or 3 hours of time that you won't have much trouble with shortness of breath.
Sweet.
And maybe more than that.
Perfect. And so that's another, even just on the physical therapy side of life, why it's important for your muscles to warm up too. And so it's not just another reason to warm up within that. Another thing that we talked about was how inflammation in general in your body, and an inflammation more so in your lungs as well, is part of the reason why you have some of the spasm and why allergies play a huge role into it. And so sometimes even knocking down just your level of inflammation, level of irritation that you're getting the inflammation from, is a huge issue for...
It surely is. And a lot of times the inflammation that she's talking about with asthma symptoms is more allergic inflammation. And if you really are having very much trouble with allergic inflammation, then allergy testing really does a good job without having to use any of those medications and such that cause dangerous side effects and such. And allergy testing is really not all that painful. And you've had it done, and and your brothers had it done too.
Worth it.
And your brother saw the whole program through, and you kind of weaseled out because you didn't want to get your shots.
I don't like shots.
But they're working on the oral immunotherapy, and it's still not as good as shots.
But you can also.
But it does help.
Yep. And you can also have some dietary allergies that flow a little bit into this as well. It's just like your level within that.
That's true. And there are some people who have trouble with wheat or with corn or with some of the other things that it's just a low level inflammatory response. And sometimes that can be a contributing factor, although it's not
the main factor.
It's really not going to be the main thing.
But it can contribute. Right?
Yeah, it can. I know a couple of people that say their endurance is better. I have no way of measuring that exactly. When they avoid corn or something like that.
Yeah, and so it may not be your entire kit and caboodle, but just as another factor, just like staying hydrated.
Yeah,
is a huge part within that too.
Staying hydrated is a huge thing, and of course the worst thing about that is if you stay really well hydrated, then you're probably gonna have to find a place to go pee. and I know there's a lot of ladies particularly who don't drink very much just for that reason, and it would be better if they would consume a little more water.
Let me go through the comments and see if there's anything that we need to know or have questions about. Would nose strips help at all, Dad?
Maybe. I mean, there's football players that think they do. And if you got a lot of congestion or if your nose tends to swell on the inside, which it will sometimes, then yeah, it probably would help a little bit. I don't think it would gain you that much, but it might gain you 15-20%.
Yep.
And that might be significant.
Yep, definitely. Christina, you said that you've had allergies or asthma since you were 3. Doctors kept on giving you a lot of medications, and then you finally took out the grain, sugar, and the booze, and you just hiked 4 days in Yosemite with no inhaler and no allergies. That's fantastic.
That's good.
That's great. And as we just talked about, how diet can be a huge factor within that. And Christy, it looks like you take Claritin and you have most of your issues from October through March. I think that goes back into some of those leaves.
That's the mold season mostly.
And so that can be a huge factor within that. Any other suggestions for her?
Does she use a steroid nasal spray? Because that works very well in addition to the antihistamine.
So that might be something to think about. Tanya, you talk about heat being a trigger, and this actually brings up something we haven't talked about yet that I found interesting. You have more issues in the summer, especially in Florida. It's higher humidity there, and so yes, a cold, dry air is more of a general irritant of your lungs, but some of the humidity can carry pollens better.
Well, it carries pieces of the molecules that are on the pollens for sure better.
And that's where that can play a bigger role whenever you're breathing in some of that high humidity.
There's pollens in Florida all year round. And more in the summer, but there's some all year round.
Let's see if there's any other questions here. Michelle asked if swearing during climbing was a symptom. I think so.
If what?
Swearing.
Yeah.
She asked if this happens when you try to breathe more deeply. Sometimes that's, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, but sometimes that's that air trapping.
Maybe.
Potential.
Maybe.
Let me see if anybody else has any questions. If you have no allergies but exercise-induced asthma, are you having a panting episode? Do you just slow and deepen your breath if you're having issues with that? Or what do you do whenever you're out there in the woods and you're having more so one of these episodes?
Just kind of slow down and try to think calm thoughts, if nothing else. Because that calming yourself down has a huge influence on this. And if you get scared and you say, oh my gosh, I'm not going to be able to breathe enough to get out of these woods, then that's going to make you worse.
Yep, definitely. Just calming yourself down helps a ton.
That
within this.
and breathing kind of regularly, just sort of like you're meditating.
Mm-hmm.
The
Yep.
And just
calming your body so then you can breathe. It's basically because you have a spasm.
Because it will straighten out.
Definitely.
You just have to relax and let it. It almost has to run its course to a point.
Yep. So we're gonna take one more question. I think it's Christy that put this up. She asked if you take a steroid year round, does that help prevent any other issues within it? Or is it useful to take a steroid year round?
Now, what kind of steroid are we talking about? Are we talking about
an inhaled steroid?
An inhaled corticosteroid? There's very little side effect to a small dose of an inhaled steroid, and it does help if that's what you've got. But you probably need to be sure that that's what your diagnosis is. And I would guess that you wouldn't be prescribed one unless somebody was pretty sure of that. But I wouldn't 100% count on that, because there are times when oh, my buddy's a doctor, he'll do that for me. And stuff like that happens without things being really tested and found out for sure.
Perfect.
So it does. It is. And there's, people are up and down a whole lot on their dosages, and at least they used to be in my practice. And if you weren't needing as much, then we kind of had a way of toning it down a little bit. And if you were using all combos sometimes, like Advair, and sometimes you didn't need that, you just needed maybe one puff a day of something, or maybe not even one puff a day, maybe one puff every other day.
Perfect.
Then that helped too. And you would know that you needed to go back up on it because you were needing your rescue inhaler, your quick relief, much more.
Good. Another thing that just to throw out there for anybody that has trouble breathing whenever you're on your climb is to take it a little bit slower, and also to use the pieces of the trail that are a little bit more flat to go slower during it. So if you have like a punchy section and then it flattens out just a little bit, don't try to go quickly through the leveled out part.
Let yourself rest a little.
Let yourself recover your breath. That's whenever you're going to knock down the need of how much you need oxygen and how much your body needs it as much. Making sure that you slow your breath through that. I mean, go snail's pace if you need to. It's where you calm your body down, and also not getting frustrated with yourself when you're on a climb if you don't make a specific move, because that brings up that anxiety. And sometimes that can trigger into a little bit more of a spasm as well.
Sure. And you can speak from experience on that.
I can speak from a little bit of experience on that. Perfect. All right, guys. Well, thanks for coming on with us. Great questions. If you have any other easier questions, I'll take them at the bottom. Just in the comments, if you're catching the replay, go ahead and say that. And if you have questions within that, Dad's going to be hanging out with me for the next couple days, or at least until tomorrow. And so he can help me answer them within that. Thank you for coming on, Dad.
All right, you're welcome.
All right, guys, have a good night.